his song was so hauntingly a great chronicle. Even if there were some inaccuracies after the fact, it's still, I guess, will go down in history alongside that ship.
Oh, Kathy, if you think about, where does the love of God go when the waves turn the
Mhm.
minutes to hours? If you've ever been in a storm, it feels like time slows down. And those lyrics just make the hair on my arm stand up straight.
Welcome to another Fascinated by Shipwrecks podcast, where I'm super excited to have Ric Mixter here today. He is one of the foremost experts on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And this month we could say, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the ship. But it is a very important anniversary in the legacy of this ship and the people who were lost and the families who were left behind. Thank you so much for being here today, Ric.
Oh, I'm thrilled. And I've been saying commemorating because it is. We should celebrate an incredible ship, but it's a tragic loss of 29 lives. So we try to find an equal balance between the both.
What are your plans around the 50th anniversary?
I have 30 lectures in four different states, so 30 different cities in Wisconsin, Minnesota. I'll be going to Toledo. So I'll follow the route of the Fitzgerald from where she was built at Ecorse, where they want a special, commemoration, and go right to the last dock that the Fitzgerald went to in Superior, Wisconsin, and then highlight that with a keynote address for the Gales of November, which is a big show in Duluth. And then end up at the National Museum of the Great Lakes in Toledo because she was called the Toledo Express, where she made 85% of her run. So I kind of follow a run that the Fitzgerald did. And that's interesting that it would work out that way.
Very interesting, and also that it's a one-man show.
It really is. I mean, honestly, it took a lot of people to gather the knowledge I have, and a lot, even my dive was, much more than just me. But it's all kind of boiled down to being my books, my documentaries, and stuff, which then you could also argue that's a family project as well.
But I wanted to sort of start out asking why you think this particular ship still haunts the social consciousness.
There's 25,000 people lost on the Great Lakes. There's over 10,000 ships. And the two words I would say is Gordon Lightfoot. The whole thing is all on his song. It was inspired by a mystery, 29 people vanishing in an age when we had a satellite in the sky and helicopters to search, and 29 people vanished. And it was a big mystery. Where did they go? And that inspired Newsweek to write an article. And that Newsweek article was picked up by Mr. Lightfoot, who wrote a song that plays every November. It became number 2 on the charts. And that's why, there's so many bigger storms, there's so many more tragic losses. But that song has got to be, and really why we talk about shipwrecks on the Great Lakes is because of the Fitzgerald, from that song. So that we owe him a lot, but I also criticize him a lot because his song is pretty inaccurate.
Yeah, I can understand that. I have been thinking that, without that song, I guess Fitzgerald would have just been another shipwreck.
Oh, and there's a giant song about the Lady Elgin where we lost 400 people in one shipwreck on Lake Michigan. Why don't we still celebrate that today? It's got to be because Casey Kasem had it number 2. He would have made number 1, but Rod Stewart's "Tonight's the Night" was a love song that went on for 8 weeks at number 1. He was never going to beat it. And then after the November gales quieted down, so did the charts. So he kind of vanished very quickly after that. In fact, Disco Duck by Rick Dees made more hit sales than Gordon Lightfoot did, but we don't talk much about Disco Duck anymore, but we talk about the Fitzgerald.
Yes, and his song was so hauntingly a great chronicle. Even if there were some inaccuracies after the fact, it's still, I guess, will go down in history alongside that ship.
Oh, Kathy, if you think about, where does the love of God go when the waves turn the
Mhm.
minutes to hours? If you've ever been in a storm, it feels like time slows down. And those lyrics just make the hair on my arm stand up straight. But yeah, there are, the destination fully loaded for Cleveland. All of that's incorrect. The old cook did not say, fellas, it's been good to know you. He'd only been on the ship for 2 weeks. The old cook was off the ship. So there's a lot of stuff that I wish he would have changed because he did stop singing certain lyrics towards the end of his career because of contact with the families. And I wish he would have changed the glaring errors rather than the hatchway giving in, which was actually accurate.
Right. So moving on from that wonderful song that will live on forever, I'm sure. What can you tell us about the history of the ship? And I believe that you spoke to some of the shipbuilders.
Detroit had pretty much reached its apex. We had 200 years of shipbuilding in Michigan that started pre-Revolutionary War with the British in Detroit, and it went right to the building of the Fitzgerald, which would be the largest ship ever launched on the Great Lakes out of the Detroit River. So, at a time when there had been a 5-year lapse in building ships, the William Clay Ford was hull 299. Fitzgerald came out as 300. There was an announcement they would do three maximum size acres, and it was huge for our state. But it also marked the end of a mecca that had lasted 200 years. So I see the Fitzgerald as more than just a sunken ship. It represents the biggest and best that would come out of our Great Lakes. We would build the front end of a 1,000-footer that's still sailing today, and a tugboat that would be built and still sailing today. But the Fitzgerald was one of a kind, and it was built, with the lavishness of Hudson's Corporation that outfitted it, because this would be a ship where all the owners of the steel company could take cruises in the summertime. So it was beautiful, had air conditioning, and everybody wanted to work for this boat. So that's why I say we celebrate that history, because it was more than just a boat that sank. It was considered the flagship of Ogilvy Norton of Columbia. It was an incredible boat.
And there was a certain particular way that they built the ship in subsections as well, correct?
They did. Since World War II, we'd been building this way, but not in Detroit. And after the William Clay Ford was built, they came up with what was called a production well, a special way to speed a ship along. Three companies could build these subsections. So now you've got this massive ship appearing almost like magic in front of the shipyard. And a lot of people wondering, was it built too fast? Did it break apart because it was built this way? But I'd have to argue, the Homer came out, it broke a lot of records for Bethlehem, and then it just was outdated when the 1,000-footers came out and they scrapped it. The Jackson is still sailing today, and it was built exactly like well, the outside appearance of the Fitzgerald's a little bit different, but the structure of the ship is the same, and the way they built it is the same. So it's hard to argue. The big difference was Fitzgerald never missed a fight with Mother Nature. These captains thought that ship was not ever going to be phased. And we have records from the Weather Bureau that prove that Fitzgerald actually had its picture in the Weather Bureau account saying, guess who's the best ship for making it through the storms again this year, 2 years in a row. And we now know that every time it went into a storm, it broke pieces of its keel. So this was really bad news that these captains thought they were indestructible. And the Fitzgerald in the storm proved that they weren't.
What about the weather systems in that region? A lot of us assume to know that there are these winter storms, but on that particular night, there was something different about that storm that the Fitzgerald encountered.
There was, but not so different. And I get angry because many of the books, especially the brand new books that are coming out now, are amplifying this storm to become something that it's not. When they call it the storm of the century, there's 250 people that died in 1913 that would disagree, 12 ships that vanished in one weekend. That is a storm of a century. The 1940 storm, which Captain Cooper, who was following the Fitzgerald in a storm, said the 1940 storm was much worse. And as a Youper growing up in 100 miles from where the Fitzgerald sank, I grew up in Marquette County. The storm of 75 was bad, but nothing compared to the blizzard of 78 when our trailer was buried, So the storm was a bad one, but the Anderson did not sink. The ship behind the Anderson did not sink. We didn't have the catastrophic loss that we did of 1940, where the winds were 126 miles an hour. They blew out the portholes in one of the lighthouses. That's a bad storm. The Fitzgerald was more structure problems, big waves, but not killer waves. The highest recorded wind was 75 at Standard Rock. And for anybody to come out with these models of waves that were 40 feet high. It's ridiculous. It just didn't exist. It's just the Fitz had structural problems. They had water coming in through vents that were missing from damage on top. These are 8-inch openings that were pouring Lake Superior into the ballast, and they're trying to pump that out and then add in 21 hatch covers that were not secured. And I get so many arguments from people that say those sailors would have never gone out there. And Kathy, I'll tell you, every photo, every movie I have of the Fitz shows they only locked down the corners. They never put them securely on. And the Coast Guard proved that there was water pouring in there too. So a series of problems that went on. The captain said no overtime. That meant they weren't going to spend the time on a Sunday to lock them all down. It's 96 clamps on every 21 hatch covers. It didn't happen. And I saw the clamps in person when I dove it in 94. They weren't all dogged down, but it was a combination. All of those things, if maybe one was done and the other two happened, it might not have sank. But in that combination, like so many accidents, is a series of events that lead up. But the storm was bad. It certainly put the ship down. But to blame that and not say, hey, why didn't the Anderson sink? We don't think it was, three sister waves, like they say. It was a lot of problems. And a lot of it was the captain's errors in judgment on the storm and the captain's overtime rule. That likely came from the company as well. I'm sure he was feeling pressure on that as well to keep his budget down.
Yes, a series of human errors seems to be what happens in these incidents.
McSorley was such an interesting guy. He had worked on hulls before he went into, shipping and knew about the strength of ships. He was very well aware of it. When he was on board the Sensibar, now Captain Capser told me that he almost killed everybody on board that self-unloading ship. He was a guy, it was a big crane ship off of Chicago that just didn't know what to do in a storm and pushed through. And whenever he'd make it, I think that would make him a little more emblazoned to feel he could make it through these. The cook, Red Bergner, told me that at one time they went to the back of the boat and they were ready to launch the lifeboats. And when they called, blew the whistle at the management was looking at, McSorley's numbers and saying, hey, he's getting through. And McSorley told him, you don't make money at anchor. That means you throw down the anchor, you're not getting cargo in. So the shipping company would always say it's captain's discretion, but let's not argue that they would be very happy when a cargo came through, and they could turn the boat around and make more money. So there's a combination of things, but McSorley never missed a fight. He almost sank the Fitzgerald at least twice. And I counted 5 gale storms in 1975 alone that he made it through, that he reported gale force winds. It would actually come through McCarthy, who was his second mate, who ironically was a captain as well. So blaming the judgment on just McSorley, you got to look at John McCarthy or Jack McCarthy and say, why didn't he speak up and say, Cap, this doesn't look right? But the truth is they trusted the boat. Cooper said in an interview, that I didn't think my boat would ever sink. And that was the mentality. We'll make it. We've always made it. Why would we be lost? And by then, in seconds, they were on the bottom.
So, are there any little known facts about this sinking that has come out in your book that most people wouldn't know about?
I would say probably 60% of the book is stuff that they didn't know about. Now, you could argue Fred Stonehouse, and he's my mentor, wrote the definitive book from the Coast Guard report. And then when he wrote about the extra expeditions, including ours in 94, I fed, a lot of information to him. But he didn't want to make it into what Tattletale Sounds is, and that is the personalities. He said in the book, an airplane found the Fitzgerald. Well, I'm an investigative reporter. I have 30 years of television experience. I found the guys on 2 airplanes that found it. The Navy guys, part of the Lion Squadron, they all had roles in this. And it went from the guy who read the magnetometer of submarine detection aircraft. I find this all fascinating. So I wanted people to meet the personalities of those guys. How about the builders? No one's ever written about the builders, the guy from Escanaba, the guy that came in from Bay City. That's fascinating to me. And what did they feel, when the ship went down, when they were blaming the construction? I thought that that was a voice that hadn't been heard. What you don't find in my book is the 29 people that were lost. And the reason is because everybody's heard it. Bob Hemming did an incredible book, the first book that I know of on the Fitzgerald, and talked to the widow of McSorley, who was infirmed, talked to all of the family members. Nothing has changed since then, 50 years ago, that I thought would be pertinent to people. How many grandkids they missed out on. All of that stuff is, it's important, but it's not what I'm interested in. I wanted to know about Jacques Cousteau's mission. How did a diver die, on his visit to the Great Lakes? No one talked about it. So using my skills, I found a lady that went on board, and it's packed. I mean, there's no book that has as many pictures, because I feel that that tells a story as well. And that's what I did. I went and found these voices that had never been heard and brought them in. And that includes McGinnis, who went down and dove with the Clelia, Tom Farnquist in '89 with Varana, and the guys with Sea Grant. All of them had something to contribute, and it didn't need to just be the one person that was quoted in the newspaper. It should be the submersible pilots. They're the ones that were actually there. And that's why my book is different, and quite honestly will never be equaled, because many of these people have sadly passed away. And now, and I put a warning at the front of my book. I know where these interviews came from because I'm the only one that has them. So at least give credit, that somebody spent 30 years to find this stuff. And that's, I hope, what I can hang my hat on, not only because I saw the shipwreck, because I've done these incredible background, stories on people whose lives were affected way beyond the 29 families, which I'll never discount, but I think it's overdone. The 29 bell ringings every year, it's been done for 50 years now. And at some point, we have to start acknowledging that there was a lot more people lost on the lakes. And those bells should represent a lot more than just the oiler, the captain, or, the mates on board the Fitzgerald. It should ring loudly for the lifesavers who gave their lives, and so many other stories that didn't have Gordon to write a song about them.
Yeah, so maybe you can say a little, not that you already haven't, but maybe you can say a little bit more about your own personal experience with this ship and the wreck.
I never thought we'd see it. I grew up in the UP in a trailer. I never thought I'd fly in an airplane or dive a submersible down to see this. But because I was a journalist and they needed a storyteller to capture, I brought a photographer along from WNEM TV in Saginaw, and we captured everything. In fact, the submersible Delta was famous. Bob Ballard took it down to visit the Lusitania, which was sad. That's the reason we got into World War One, when the Germans torpedoed it. So we knew it was a safe submarine. We knew that we could visit. That submarine could do twice the depth of Lake Superior. So we weren't worried about that. But I got 2 hours on the bottom, laying on my belly in a two-person sub. The pilot flew above me looking out the conning tower, and I had windows all the way around. And I could see little glimpses of every porthole to find out, where I was and what we were seeing. And our camera outside was recording everything too. So I had a portable camera. The cameraman that dove after me from our TV station brought a camera, and then we were recording on the outside too. So we found so many things that hadn't been reported before. Hatches 2 and 3 from the bow are actually at the stern. There were no scrapes on the bottom of the wreck to indicate that it ever went aground. We found right after my dive, I came up, we had voltage in the battery still. Within a half hour of me coming to the surface, we found the first missing of the 29 guys that were lost, and he was wearing a life jacket. And this completely changed the story of 29 guys at Lake Superior never gives up its dead. And the headlines were not only, significant in what we had discovered, but tragically mean and cruel to us, calling us pirates and calling us, morbid, that we would record it when it was one of the most significant stories to come out of the Great Lakes in decades. So for us to hide and say, we're going to ignore this because it might hurt somebody's feelings is not what news people do. And it pushed us into, I think, an ethical debate on whether or not to use it, which I knew if I didn't show, we had close-ups that we would never show. But I had to make the decision as the producer and the writer and the editor of the program of what we would show. And all of this shows up in the documentary, that most people could never even find where the body was. But we showed it, and we got in trouble for it. We got a law in Michigan against recording bodies on shipwrecks that were less than 50 years old, which only meant, um, I guess it'd mean the Fitz, but the Fitzgerald was considered in Canadian water at that time. So it was a lot of nonsense legislation, and nobody wanted to hear from us. They did not invite us to Lansing to talk about it. It brought up a lot of harsh feelings to where I wouldn't even talk about Fitzgerald for a while. But now, with our expedition leader gone, he died. He never wrote his book. I thought it was my turn to add that chapter and to try to squelch some of the nonsense that's come out and still shows up in brand new books today about how he was a monster, and nothing could be further from the truth. He was offered money, tens of thousands that would have paid off his expedition for that footage, and he never gave it up. So to his dying day, his wife never got her dream home that he was supposed to get, and it never happened. So it brings up sad feelings, it brings up happy feelings, and it certainly has made my career. Even though I've drove 100 shipwrecks, I've made 30 documentaries for PBS. I've written 4 other books. I've written, countless thousands of videos on shipwreck stories, and the Fitzgerald always comes back as, everybody wants to hear more, even though we pretty much know it from Gordon's song.
So are there any other sort of unusual things to know about the ship?
There's a lot of nonsense that came out, and we talked about the big waves. I've heard people tell me there was a cargo of radioactive material on board. I've heard that aliens took the crew. We've heard all kinds of backstories of a second body is now being reported that I never, I was in the media coordinator of the entire operation. And while, Shannon is gone now, I would be the senior guy for that trip, and I never saw that. This is all rumors of a rock that had paint on it that another guy had found that continually come up to fuel this legend that are unsubstantiated. And I say that with all the knowledge of 30 years of doing interviews with the people who investigated it, the people that sailed it, the people who, have gone down and actually seen the shipwreck, and myself included. A lot of it is nonsense. The sad part is that 29 people lost their lives. There's 29 families that are devastated their loved ones would never come home. And I understand the impact of us locating one of those people. But we have 10,000 other ships that we can visit, and there's still bones at many of them. We just have to treat them all with respect. These are all grave sites, and the voices from the Fitzgerald should be no louder than the voices of the 40 storm or the voices from the 13 storm or so many others that, just vanished and nobody knows why. Those stories are so much more interesting to me. And I'm sure with the Shipwreck podcast, there's so many other ones that would make a better movie than the Edmund Fitzgerald ever would. The rescue stories of the Morel and the Bradley have fascinated me way more than the Fitzgerald. But I do understand that the song has driven this and people want to hear more. And I'm happy to share the truths and not bury, the parts that maybe might upset people.
So the ship was broken in two, correct?
2 major pieces, but the entire middle section is completely disintegrated. So that led a lot of people to believe that it nosedived. But the truth is, the first hatch collapsed in from the big wave. Hatch number 6 is also collapsed into the deck from the weight of the giant wave that hit the Anderson. And it sped in front of the Anderson almost 17 miles before it ran into the Fitzgerald. Well, forgive me, 9 miles into the Fitzgerald. And it collapsed those covers. And because it was already listing from the water coming in and the keel was in trouble, the ship, in my estimation, broke on the surface because there's no cargo in those forward hatches, which if you nosedived, 10,000 tons from at least hold number 1 would have come forward. They didn't have watertight bulkheads. So we really would have seen 26,000 tons of iron ore marbles or taconite pellets rush forward with a leaning of 30 degrees, and it would have been all over the bow. I saw none of that. And that hatch cover is at least 12 feet into the hatch. So is hatch number 2. And we know that hatch number 3's cover, which is buried in something, may have cargo, but it's got mud that's obscuring a lot of that. So some of those secrets won't be known until we actually go down there. I know that a lot of the cargo is behind the stern. Our submarine set right down, submersible right into the pile. You don't dive down nose deep and lose all your cargo behind you. That cargo would all be forward. So it broke on the surface. The stern section flipped upside down and went off course, but the bow section kept going on course for Whitefish Point, but sadly never made it.
Yeah, it's amazing to think about how it came to its end, and of course that keeps everyone sort of in that tragedy mindset of people just doing their job aboard ship, and next thing you know, they're at the bottom of the sea.
It's tragic, and there's almost like a merciful feeling that it was so sudden and over that they couldn't call for help, but that they were done. That there was nobody getting in a life raft and freezing to death like so many did on the Bradley and the Morel. That I think is a worse fate than a sudden catastrophe. Although, it trapped those bodies down there, and most of those, all the families never got to bury a loved one. And that's a pain that just, hasn't really, other than a couple of other ships. The Gordon sings about the Chippewa saying Lake Superior never gives up its dead. There was never a Chippewa legend about giving up the dead. That was something we borrowed from Lake Tahoe. But the water is so cold that there are shipwrecks where we find no one. And we just found one. The Adela Shores was one that never gave up a body either. And that just perpetuated this legend that, it happened. That's why Gordon put it in his song. But it's tragic that they're down there, but it is their grave site. And many graves I go to, my relatives, and of course, old sea captains that passed on. And I think that that's a place of respect where I can go and not talk to them, but at least feel their spirit. And I've gone to the Fitzgerald. I never felt ghosts. I never felt, like I shouldn't be there, other than the fact that it's pitch black and it's way deeper than I could ever dive with scuba gear. I've never felt ghosts on any of the ships I've been on. I just think that it's a respect that we remember those ships. And although the Fitzgerald had a song, the Bradley didn't, the Morel didn't, the Steinbrenner didn't, the Novadoc from the 40 storm. List goes on and on and on of the ones who don't get that kind of yearly reminder. But the Fitzgerald does have a place marker for all of these ships. And I think it warned a lot of captains too. We did see after 10 years a network of buoys to make it better to sail the lakes where we get real-time updates. We now have satellites that fly over that give us way better satellite, weather information. We have radios that we can contact anywhere on the Great Lakes, which even in the 1975, there were spots that would be trouble. We have satellite phones now and technology of lifeboats we crawl into and sends a radio signal right to the helicopter that's looking for you. So much more survivable. But the biggest part, I think, was maybe the captains lost that I could be killed out here. It just seemed like every 8 years we had captains making bad decisions, and that seemed to end. We still have problems, and the biggest ship on the Great Lakes has run aground and been stuck there where it had to be offloaded. So even the brand new Coast Guard cutters with technology that you steer with a joystick have run into the walls. It still will happen. There will be human error, and we just have to make sure that people respect Mother Nature because it can get bad out there. And even the 1,000 footers now will just go park. Even when it's a 10-foot sea, that it's not worth risking the crew. And the cargo is not worth that. Rocks are not worth the $8 million that the Fitzgerald was worth, or the 29 guys who'd all been highly trained. The wheelmen had been on that ship since 1958. This or 59 is when John got on board. How do you pay for that kind of experience? You can't. So to pretend that a shipping company would put that all up for a pile of rocks inside that might be, $30,000 or whatever it is, at that time for a pound of taconite, it is ludicrous that anybody would want to lose those people or that ship. And I get upset when people tell me the greed of the shipping company. That sells books, but it's not the truth. And I've talked to the owners of shipping companies, so that's what I base it on.
Well, of course, you are a veritable encyclopedia on this subject. So this has been really, truly fascinating. Do you have any other parting thoughts?
I guess I would really hope that the song Fitzgerald, that your podcast, that many people who are learning about the Fitzgerald will use this as a launching pad. Look for another book. Go out and pick up, it doesn't have to be My Howling Winds or Bottled Goodbyes that are all about messages in bottles lost by ships, but look for another author that wrote some other ship. Schumacher's books are amazing, that he's done incredible work. Read about the Carl Bradley, read about the morale and the incredible survivals, and more importantly, the heroism of the men and women who now go out and look for these people. And read about the lifesavers who put, no motorized boats, but they would go out. You had to go out, you didn't have to come back. That type of stuff is amazing. My great 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 grandpa ran out of Muskegon and saved crews on schooners there. And that stuff is 100 times more interesting. So the Fitzgerald, I hope, will be your launch point. Forgive the pun, but a great opportunity to open these new chapters. And your podcast is another great way for people to pick up on these incredible stories that we don't need ghost stories. We don't need gold stories that are all fake on the Great Lakes. Look at the real heroism and the real survivals, and you will be blown away. And that's what's more interesting to me.
Well, this has been far too short, Rick, but I really, really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. And I will be following your career with extra enthusiasm now, especially since we've talked live, which I really appreciate.
Well, it'd be my hope that I can come back and talk to you again. And please know that anytime you want to talk shipwrecks, I'll be around. Even when I'm in Arizona like today, I'm more than happy on vacation to come in and talk about these incredible stories. I'm just thrilled to be able to share what I've learned and quite honestly, what other people have done as well.
Great. Thank you so much again, and I'm sure we'll be talking in the future.
That will be my honor. Thank you, Kathy, for sharing so much with so many.
Thank you.
Beneath the ocean, silence sways, lost in time, the wreckage lies, broken masts and shattered pride. In the deep, the answers hide. Echoes of the past call out, whispers from beneath the waves. What secrets do the shadows keep? Do we dare disturb their sleep?